Hello, welcome to class. Today we are discussing the essay Myth, Morality, and the Women of X-Men. This is one of the chapters in the textbook Superheroes and Philosophy, Truth, Justice, and the Socratic Way. Let's get started. So let's begin by looking at the components for Housel's essay. Her thesis claim you can find on page 75. Some of the recent films carry philosophical messages that can illumine our lives. In particular, the X-Men films address the philosophy of human nature in a way that we can appropriate using the work of the great scholar of mythology, Joseph Campbell, along with some contemporary theories about ethical decision-making. Housel places her thesis within the first paragraph of her essay. This is unlike many of the essays that are within this textbook. She restates her thesis at the very end of her essay, but in different words. Mythology is a powerful vehicle for deepening the human experience. You can locate this on page 87. Other components of her essay include the purpose. So Housel intends to prove that mythology and the heroic journey can be applied to paper comics and comic book movies. In addition, Housel maintains that audiences have been demanding a more diverse set of comic book characters. In order to prove her claim and fulfill her purpose, she draws on the mythology of Joseph Campbell, or not the mythology, the philosophy of Joseph Campbell and his heroic journey, Lawrence Kohlberg's levels of moral development, gender theory, feminism, religious ethics, post-colonial, human nature, and morality. The examples that Housel uses in her essay include Storm, Mystique, Jean Grey, Nightcrawler, Wolverine, Cyclops, Professor X, Magneto, Wonder Woman, Black Canary, and various other Marvel and DC characters. Now that we've gone over the components of Housel's essay, let's take a look at some of the characters that we're getting ready to discuss. In particular, the three female superheroes that she focuses on. The first one is Storm. So here is Storm with Nightcrawler in the film X2. Let's look at Storm in the comic books. Notice she still does have white hair and she still is being played or portrayed as a black woman. And lastly, here are Storm and Nightcrawler in the comics. So Nightcrawler still has his blue skin and his eyes are still differently colored. However, in the comic books, Storm goes between having a full head of hair to having a mohawk. So it really depends on what year, what edition, and what series of the paper comics that you are looking at in regards to Storm. Let's move on to Mystique. So in the comic books, Mystique does have the blue skin, she does have the red hair, and here she's having an interchange with somebody else. She's threatening them. And then in the movie for X2, here is Mystique. She has the scaly skin that Housel talks about, that her and Nightcrawler both have, and she has the red hair. So please keep in mind your use of colors in regards to characters as we continue to discuss them. Let's now go look at Jean Grey. So if we begin with the paper comics, you can see here is Jean Grey in the background with all the men taking the main focus. Then here is Jean Grey as a young girl, and Professor X is recruiting her to come to his special school for mutants. Here is a very seductive look at Jean Grey in the movie X2. If you'll notice, her jacket is partially unzipped. She's looking off into the distance. And lastly, here's a picture of Jean Grey in battle mode and flying the jet. This is the way that the X-Men get around in the movie, particularly when they're trying to get back and forth to Stryker's facility. So we've taken a look at Storm, Mystique, and Jean Grey. We have looked at both the paper comic version and the movie version of these two characters. Let's go delve in deeper into Housel's essay. I had to fix my screen because my Kindle reader was going further and my picture-in-picture was giving me some issues. I apologize for that. So after she reminds the audience that women are being larger than life in the movie screens and that people are demanding more adversity, she wants to talk to you about the basic origin story, and she says that it's simple. So it is here in which Housel is starting a comparison on morals and power while she's summarizing the movies. And that's very important to keep in mind. So she tells you all about the movies. I'm not going to belabor that point because you have already read that. And as she is talking to you about who is in the Brotherhood and who stands with the X-Men and what their purposes are, she talks to you about Magneto, who represents evil, and Xavier, who represents the people who want to do good and save the mutants. And if you look at the bottom of 76, Housel states, in his evil, Magneto stands opposed to Xavier to represent an important part of the duality apparent in all myth: good and evil, woman and man, life and death. Recognizing this duality is, in classic mythology, the first step in moving out into the wider world, and that is how X2 begins. So she summarized the movie for you. She summarized how mythology can be applied to the origin stories here, and she goes on to quote Joseph Campbell, and she says, Campbell suggests that behind every duality there's a singularity at play. The main premise of the second X-Men film is that there should always be transcendence through duality to particular singularity or unity. And Housel will return to this point when she starts to discuss Jean Grey. But in order to get to that unity, she has to discuss Storm, which represents the perfect hero. She has to discuss Mystique, which is the anti-hero. And then she discusses Jean Grey, which represents transcending through that the duality and the singularity into a unity. But to get there, she has to draw upon Campbell's works of mythology, and she also draws upon cultures, because she says that it's important to note that the mythologies of all cultures is crucial for understanding the parallels between traditional mythology and Hollywood superhero myths. And she zones in on human nature, and she zones in on heroic excellence. And in order for you, the reader, to agree with what she's saying, she has to go back to Campbell's heroic journey, and she defines this because she doesn't expect that the audience is going to be well versed in heroic mythology. And she says that all heroes must go through a cyclical journey that involves three main phases: departure, initiation, and return. And so now that she's provided you with the definition that she's using from Campbell, she wants to remind you that a hero can be a man or a woman, and a hero must become a master of two worlds. And this involves a necessary transformation of consciousness, and it completes the journey. The same threefold cycle is used in many ways by popular films, and is certainly an underlying part of the hero plots in both X-Men and X2, X-Men United. Before she proceeds on to her examples of the three men, or the three women, she decides that she's going to remind you about the paper comic, The Uncanny X-Men, and she brings in Stan Lee. All this builds her ethos, her credibility. She's also building her logos because she's expanding her text. She's using other text to prove her point. But she wants to let you know, and she wants to address the naysayers, hey, look, this isn't just present in Marvel. You can also see this in the DC universe. So she talks about Wonder Woman, the Black Canary, and Sue Storm. She brings it back around to Marvel again by talking about the Fantastic Four and Wasp. And she tells you that the X-Men have more strong female roles than is typical in most superhero stories. Now, please keep in mind that this book was written almost 15 years ago, and I do believe that DC has been doing a great job in bringing about more strong female leads. But I do concur with Housel in that I think Marvel does a better job with diversity than DC does. But that was the whole point that Marvel was trying to make back in the 1960s, was diversity. I mean, we have to stop and think about the civil rights movement, the first, second, and third wave of feminism, the disabilities movement, and then you have the LGBTQIA community. So all these things were represented well within Marvel Comics, and it seems to be that Marvel Comics maybe represents more raw material in that context, whereas DC was so focused heavily during the 40s and 50s on building patriotism with like Superman and Supergirl and characters like that, whereas Marvel was able to go and explore more diversified themes. So first off, Housel provides you with her claim, she provides you with her thesis, she provides you with the theory that she's going to use. She references well-known sources, so her credibility is very high at this point. And now she's going to build her logos by looking at the 3 women that she wants to use as her examples. Now we're going to discuss the 3 female characters that Housel is using as her examples and evidence to fit her claim about mythology, demand for diversity, and being able to apply these to our lives. The first character that she discusses is Storm, and if you remember, Storm is played by Halle Berry in the movie, and Storm is also represented within the paper comics as also being an African queen. Housel lets you know that the first time the Storm appeared was in Marvel Comics Giant Size X-Men issue 1 in 1975. She lets you know that Storm left Cairo, Egypt, and that she has mutant abilities to be able to basically create storms so she can control the weather. While she leaves Cairo and she begins her heroic journey, she does complete all 3 phases. And if you look on page 78, you will be able to see, as Housel says, she, being Storm, fits perfectly within Campbell's classic definition of the hero hearing a call to a new adventure, leaving the known for the unknown. So that's the first phase. Encountering trials, that's the second phase. Growing from them and returning home, that's the third phase, at least metaphorically, with new riches of wisdom. Storm leaves the isolation and safety of her surroundings in Kenya, where she is worshipped as a goddess for her incredible powers, to join Professor X in America, crossing that threshold and facing serious trials, all in the name of justice and good. Now remember, we've been studying this semester that one of the purposes of a superhero is that they desire that the communities have justice. And that's exactly what Storm does. So if you will turn the page to page 78. Oh, excuse me. Yes, we're still on page 78. Housel describes Storm, but she's describing the cinematic version. She says that Storm is played by Halle Berry. And for those of you that don't know, Halle Berry is a very beautiful woman. And here's her picture again. And Housel talks about how Halle Berry is aesthetically pleasing. And Housel references the fact that there is a rich tradition of superhero comics of women that are apparently introduced just because of their exaggerated beauty. But Storm isn't on the scene for her physique or face, and she's not the center of traditional patriarchal heterosexual matrix in which she has to have the male-female relationship. Housel says that Storm is her own person and that she brings a lot of substance to the X-Men. Now, I do agree with that. If you look at the comic book version of Storm, though, you will see that she still does have the exaggerated body forms. And in the movies, Storm is being played by Halle Berry, and we all know that Halle Berry does have a very pleasing to the eye form. So I don't know that I would necessarily say that the cinematic version leaves the paper version of exaggerated body types, because I still believe that in both forms, Storm is represented as being very voluptuous. But I would agree with Housel in that Storm does break the patriarchal expectations of having to be in a relationship. Now, in the movie, Storm meets Nightcrawler, and Housel describes him to you. He has a prehensile tail, he has scales, he has the yellow eyes, and he's covered in forms of self-mutilation. They're like symbols that he's etched into his own skin, and he tells her that it's Gabriel, the archangel, who has been guiding him, and the etchings are the numbers of his sins. And because of Nightcrawler's appearance, he has very much an awareness that he is considered an other, and this would fall within the post-colonial lens. So let's take a look at a clip from X-Men so that we can see how Storm, Jean Grey, and Nightcrawler interact, and how Nightcrawler discusses these etchings on his body. So unfortunately, the clip that I have for this section has been banned by Fox Entertainment for me supposedly causing copyright infringement issues. So I will provide the links to the videos on our Blackboard shell. I will try to provide those links also within the YouTube description for this video. Unfortunately, every single time that I have tried to upload this class lecture video, my video keeps being banned on YouTube. So I wanted to show you movie clips just like I would inside of the classroom, but I'm not going to be able to do that. You will see this same section of video clip here in the other places where I had video clips for you as well. So please continue with the class lecture. As you saw in the video clips, Storm does interact with Nightcrawler, and he does talk to her about the etchings on his body. He does talk to her about faith, and it's very important to keep in mind that Nightcrawler challenges Storm's way of thinking, and in turn, Storm challenges Nightcrawler. And if we look at what Housel's writing about in regards to Campbell, it says on page 79, the next step according to Campbell is transcendence through duality to singularity, which of course the natural progressions in the ideal relationship, to become of one mind or one spirit, two halves of a whole, as the great philosopher Aristotle and many others have understood. So the relationship between Nightcrawler and Storm is helping her to fulfill that transcendence, because she's forming this relationship that isn't necessarily a relationship of her taking care of someone else or that person taking care of her. It's a matter of this interchange of conversation, of ideas, and helping each other and challenging one another to grow. So keep that in mind as we continue to discuss these characters, and let's look at what psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg has to say about his 3 levels of moral development. So first is the pre-conventional level, and this is just a basic obedience to authority. And then the next level is the conventional level, and this is where we start to work more with complex moral reasoning. And it's at this stage that people try to fit in and, to like become part of the norm. And then it's the last level in which the moral development can display, ethical reasoning of some sort. So a higher moral focus is displayed at the post-conventional level. And Housel says that Storm does typically display the post-conventional level of the ethics of justice because she's always seeking to protect humans, and she does this in a rational and an objective way. She's able to demonstrate her ethical decision-making. And so all of this Housel labels as masculine ethics. But Housel points out that Storm doesn't just display masculine ethics, she also displays feminine ethics, and Housel labels this as care ethics. And she says that this term is identified by Kohlberg. And let's go read that on page 80. However, she, being Storm, also has the ability to shift from action in accordance with the masculine ethics of Kohlberg to the alternative feminine conception of care ethics identified by Kohlberg's most prominent critic and former assistant at Harvard, Carol Gilligan. So what Housel is doing here is she's representing the continuum of opinion, and she's looking at the discourse regarding masculine and feminine ethics. So she quotes Kohlberg, and she's saying, look, Storm fixed Kohlberg's masculine ethics. And then she says, okay, but Carol Gilligan stands in opposition of Kohlberg, and Carol Gilligan talks about feminine ethics. And Housel's saying, look, we can use both Gilligan and Kohlberg, and we can use it to describe how Storm's character functions. This is really great synthesization of sources and theory, and Housel is doing this flawlessly within her essay. And if you move on to page 81, she applies Gilligan's conception of care ethics and applies this with Storm. And she says Storm exhibits an almost maternal reaction when she dashes off to save the children she has just seen on a surveillance monitor. This is during the X2 film. She has a moral complexity, and she masters ethical duality. She's not bound to one conception of ethics over another. She seems to clearly understand that different situations require different ways of thinking. Ethical action may be based on an abstract sense of justice and corresponding duty, or it can arise out of proper emotion. In her understanding of this, she functions outside typical gender expectations, both in terms of mythology and moral psychology. And Housel then claims Storm is perhaps the perfect hero. She has mental and physical toughness, beauty, and a nurturing feminine side, as well as focused rational side. She completes Campbell's heroic phases. So this is some really strong argumentative work going on here. And then she takes you back to Joseph Campbell's insights into myths and how they can guide us in our understanding how each person is only a small piece of the total image of humanity. That's very important to remember, because the purpose of Housel's essay and the purpose of the scholars within this textbook are wanting us to apply what we're learning back to our own personal lives. So if she's arguing that this is only one person, it's only one small piece, it's not like a total image of humanity, then we also need to keep that in mind. And in order to do this, she reminds us to consider gender, age, profession, religion, orientation. She also reminds us to keep in mind, great diversity that we've seen throughout history, such as Plato, the Apostle Paul, the Stoics, and Pascal. And then she challenges us, and she says that if we apply Campbell's conception of the heroic to Storm, and we add on to that Gilligan's care ethics, then we should look to ourselves, and we should look to see how each and every one of us can be a hero. Storm is the perfect hero according to Housel if you're applying Joseph Campbell's heroic theory. Then she looks at Mystique, and Mystique is a a shapeshifter. She can take on any form, any gender. And in the movie, she's portrayed by Rebecca Ramajan Stamus in X2. Now, Housel compares the movies with the paper comics. And if you remember, I showed you the paper comic version and I showed you the movie version. Now, in the paper version, Mystique is actually the mother of Kurt Wagner, but in the cinematic version, she is not. So remember that sometimes when we make a cinematic comic book movie, we will change the narrative. And I just want you to keep that in mind as you're reading Housel's paper, because sometimes it could become confusing if you're not careful with it. Housel does describe Mystique to you, and she says that she has the yellow snake-like eyes with the red hair and the serpentine look because she has like the scales on it. And she says that the snake is a primary and ancient mythological symbol associated with the feminine, rebirth, and mystery. Mystique's physical appearance in the film alludes to all of this. Even her name has ancient intonations, as the root word mystique is Latin for mystes, meaning a priest of the mysteries or one who has been initiated. Both of these definitions fit her character. So let's think about it. If her name is Mystique and is from the Latin word mystes and is one of mysteries, well, we can definitely say that Mystique is a mystery. We really never know if we're talking to Mystique or somebody else. And she does represent the feminine ideal, and she does represent rebirth. Now, Housel says that Mystique's unstable nature and the fact that she can be a female or a male causes a transmuting of the physical duality, and that she can never transcend into the hero cycle. But she doesn't stop there, because she knows that people are going to be naysayers against that, and she says that she being Mystique, is also a sociopath, that she wants to kill humans, and that she'll do whatever is necessary in order to reach her goals. And there's something very different about Mystique in that in the cinematic version, she's very proud of who she is. Now, this is in the X2 film, but as they continue to make more X-Men films and they actually go backwards in time, like Star Wars and Star Trek and all these other famous narratives have done, she wasn't always that way. She used to purposely take on a form because she didn't want people to see her blue skin. So here on page 82, when Housel talks about the fact that Mystique will use her abilities to do whatever she wants, whether it be seduce a man or impersonate somebody, Housel also talks about a conversation that Mystique has with Nightcrawler, and why doesn't she necessarily choose to stay human. So let's take a look at this in the X2 movie. We've looked at Storm and Mystique, and now we're going to look at the last evidence and example that Housel has for her essay, and that's Jean Grey. Jean Grey first appeared in X-Men issue 1 in 1963, unlike Storm and Mystique, who appeared much later in the 70s. So unlike Storm and Mystique, who've had many years of evolution within the comics and more diversification, Jean Grey's entering the scene, and she's still underneath the patriarchal influence that men have upon. Housel goes on to say that Jean is portrayed as trustworthy, loyal, and intelligent, yet lacking in self-confidence and dependent on the men around her. She's also physically attractive and is part of the classical love triangle with her fellow X-Men, Scott, who's known as Cyclops, and Wolverine, who's also known as Logan. And so Housel goes on to talk to you about the X2 movie, and she takes you into a scene in which Jean Grey and Storm and the other adult X-Men and women have taken the mutant children to the Natural History Museum, and Jean seems to be suffering from some headaches, and she's been suffering from them for a while, and Housel says that this is a foreshadowing that Jean Grey is going to undergo a transformation and that she's possibly going to become the Phoenix. So after she has summarized part of the movie and part of Jean's backstory, Housel goes on to tell you about her capabilities, which are telepathy and telekinesis. Now, oftentimes within X-Men, Jean Grey doesn't think that she's as powerful as Professor X or other people around her, and she also seems to think this in the X2 movie as well. What we later learn in a different movie is that Jean is actually the most powerful mutant that they have ever discovered, and Professor X has been using his mental abilities to block the Phoenix, who is uncontrollable, who seems to act out of anger and emotion and not out of logic. So if we take into account the foreshadowing that's going on in X2 and what Professor X, was doing when he first recruited Jean, then we know that it's more than likely that the Phoenix will come on in another movie. And so Housel talks to you about the Phoenix and how Jean Grey got her powers through the solar radiation. Kind of sound familiar, right? Other characters that have had radiation issues. And she says that Jean's character evolves personally, socially, and philosophically. And as she evolves, her powers grow. And at the end of X2, after Jean sacrifices her life, there's an illusion that maybe she'll come back as the Phoenix. And later on, we learn that she does. But at the time, we didn't know that. So let's go look at that clip of Jean Grey that Housel has been discussing, and then we'll come back and we'll pick up on page 84. So unfortunately, the clip that I have for this section has been banned by Fox Entertainment for me supposedly causing copyright infringement issues. So I will provide the links to the videos on our Blackboard shell. I will try to provide those links also within the YouTube description for this video. Unfortunately, every single time that I have tried to upload this class lecture video, my video keeps being banned on YouTube. So I wanted to show you movie clips just like I would inside of the classroom, but I'm not going to be able to do that. You will see this same section of video clip here in the other places where I had video clips for you as well. So please continue with the class lecture. So as you saw in the clip, Jean Grey decides to give up her life in order to save her fellow mutants and save the mutant children. And according to Housel, throughout Jean Grey's life, which are depicted in the films, she exhibits all three main levels of Culber's ethics of justice. She completes the pre-conventional level because she's guided by those in authority. She completes the second level because she does develop morally. And she completes the third level, which is the post-conventional level, because she does commit the supererogatory act of self-sacrifice in order to save those around her. Now, here Housel says that you could call this a quintessential utilitarian thought process. And I can see where she's saying that. However, I don't know that I fully agree, and I would like to know what you have to say about this. Do you think it falls within utilitarianism? Do you think it falls somewhere else? Even Housel's asking these same questions if we look here on page 85. So what Housel does is she says Jean sacrifices herself, and this is one common understanding of Gilligan's care ethics, is that women regard themselves as being equally deserving of those around them. But Housel goes on to say, if you move on page 85, is precisely because she goes beyond the call of duty that the act is heroic. She acts not out of duty, but out of love, care, and concern, knowing her death alone can save the rest of the X-Men. In doing this, she becomes something like a Christ figure, and her death correspondingly seems to foreshadow a resurrection. So if I stop and I think about the theory that we've been talking about for the last 3 chapters within the textbook, we did talk about utilitarianism and the fact that you want to supply the most amount of happiness for the group. And then we also talked about personalism, and that superheroes take on a personalistic thought process in which they can't choose one person over another person. They have to save everybody. So my question to you is, do you think that Jean's act is utilitarianism, or do you think it's personalism? And explain your answer. Why do you think that? Now, we all know that later on she does come back as the Phoenix. That happens in another movie. But I like how Housel still remains on this one act within her essay, and now she pulls in the Gospel of John, and she says, "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." And she says that Jean Grey proves that this is not the privilege of a man alone. So here, Housel is definitely taken a feministic lens, a gender lens, and playing with the word man. If we were to go back to the original language, I think it meant more than man. I think it meant people, but that's an argument for another day. Nevertheless, let's look at Housel's argument. She says that in doing so, she just may be overcoming the duality implicit in both justice ethics and the standard feminist interpretation of care ethics. There's no calculation weighing her rights versus the rights of her colleagues, and there's no question of whom to care for, her own self or them. It could be that she's transcended through duality to a singularity or unity with the others, such as to elide the difference between self-sacrifice and self-preservation. She does what has to be done for the preservation of the greater unity. So this is very interesting because Housel is working with utilitarianism. She is working with personalism, although she doesn't say it. She's working with feminism. She's working with gender. She's working with care ethics. She's working with Joseph Campbell's The Heroic Journey. She is working with justice ethics, and she synthesized them all together into her own argument. And she goes on to explain what a supererogatory act is on page 86. And she says that the surprising reward is that Jean Grey will rebirth as the powerful Phoenix. Then she starts to summarize her argument, and she says that Campbell's stages of the heroic correspond with Jean's metamorphosis in X2. She comes out of her shell, she's brave, she undergoes a transformation of consciousness, she sacrifices herself, and then she's going to become this next bird-like figure, the Phoenix. And because she does that, she masters 2 worlds. Now, Housel starts to ask you questions. And she's like, but will she come back to X-Men, or will she be different? She reminds you about Campbell, and she quotes Campbell, "Wherever the hero may wander, whatever he may do, he is ever in the presence of his own essence. Social participation may lead in the end to the realization of the all in the individual, so that of exile brings the hero to the self in all." So Housel knows that Jean Grey does come back as the Phoenix, and she has found a quote that supports that, which is great. I mean, she's tying together the movies, and I'm very appreciative of that. And Housel says that Jean Grey transcends the dualities within herself, and that she becomes a hero. After she's walked you through the storm, the mystique, and the Jean Grey examples, she reminds you of her claim, but she says it in other words. She says mythology is a powerful vehicle for deepening the human experience. So, what do you think of the essay? Do you agree with Housel? Do you disagree with Housel? What do you like and not like? Are you picking up on the theories within the text itself? Are you starting to become more comfortable with the critical lenses and the issues and themes that we've been talking about? I would like to hear back from you on that. You can post some comments in the YouTube link. You could also bring your comments to class. And now I would like to show you the Works Cited page. So if you want to go watch those video clips, you can. If you want to use them in your own research, you can do that. So I will provide you with my Works Cited list in the Blackboard course site so that you can go access the video clips that I would like for you to watch along with this video lecture. Thank you for joining me. I hope that you have a great time, and I'll see you soon.